Chapter 109. For this woman, other than being able to refresh her mind, it was no longer important whether or not this Ruidu had the effect that she thought it had. Tonight, her master was in a great mood. It was rare for him to say so many intimate words to her. In an instant, she thought back to 10 years ago when he had just become a jinshi. However, because he was born into a poor family, he did not have any background. He could only become a small county magistrate in a remote place. Although his days were hard, his family was happy and harmonious. After experiencing 10 years of hard work in his official career, he was no longer a small 7th-ranked official. However, he was even busier in his work. Before today, her master had not touched her for several months. Tonight's happiness was completely beyond her expectations. The scholar did not seem to have explained the full effect of this Ruidu. The hidden effect was what she was most satisfied with. She only thought that tomorrow, she would definitely buy more Ruidu. Other than the effect, it would be of great help to her master's work. Temporarily putting aside this thought, a trace of red crept up her cheeks and she took the initiative to greet him. The room was filled with love, causing the servant girl standing at the door of the study to blush. The next morning, when the woman walked out of the study, her face was abnormally rosy and she looked much younger. The servant girl in the courtyard secretly looked at the woman. Thinking about the voice she heard at the door last night, a trace of red appeared on her pretty face again. Tao, come over. The woman waved her hand and the two pretty servant girls in the courtyard immediately trotted over. What instructions does madam have? The beautiful woman opened her mouth and said, the two of you, go to the accounts room and take 20 taels of silver. Then go to the Rui workshop we went to yesterday and buy a batch of Ruidu. Yes, madam, we will go now. The young servant girl responded and did not delay in the direction of the accounts room. At the same time, in a deep courtyard on the other side of the prefecture city, a young servant girl knocked on the door of her young miss room. When she walked in, she saw her young miss sitting on the bed in a daze. Somewhat puzzled, she asked, young miss, what's wrong? The woman returned to her senses and said, go to the street and find a shop called Rui Workshop and buy some Ruidu. Young miss, what is Ruidu? This was the first time the young servant girl had heard of this name and a puzzled expression appeared on her face. When you find that shop, you will naturally know. The woman got up from the bed and pointed at the toiletries in the hands of the young maidservant. She ordered, put those things down. The shop is in the East Market. It's next to the cloth shop that we went to a few days ago. Perhaps business is not good and they are closed. With that said, he strolled back into his shop. If it were not for the fact that the young girl at the door was extremely delicate, he would not even be interested in talking to her. Ah, closed. The three girls looked at each other with bitter expressions on their faces. Inside the cloth shop, the shopkeeper sat lazily on a wooden armchair. His fat face was also full of doubts. Strange, I don't know what the shop next door is selling. There was not much business yesterday, why is today? In the Willow Leaf Village, Fong also had a bitter expression. His heart ached, but he still looked at Li Yi and comforted him, young master, don't be sad. Didn't you say that failure is success? The business of Ruidu is not good, but we can still sell that liquor. Old Fong knew very well that for the sake of the Ruidu business, the son-in-law had built the workshop and rented the shop. He had invested almost all of his wealth into it. If he lost everything, he would definitely feel bad. In fact, Li Yi was not distressed about the money. In the time travel novels that he had read before, there was no lack of floral dew. But why was it that once the floral dew was sold, it immediately became popular all over the world and made a lot of money, but when it came to him, no one cared about it. Everyone was time traveling. Why couldn't he do it? Was he really not as good as others? This kind of blind self-esteem was the reason why he was in a dilemma at the moment. Chapter 110. No matter what, he had spent a lot of effort on the Rui nectar. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Li Yi would not give up easily. Last night, he had already thought of a few marketing strategies. If it didn't work, he could find a few shills and create hype. Of course, whether these methods would work or not, he would only know after trying it out. After breakfast, he went down the mountain and returned to the prefecture city. This time, he didn't let Xiao Huan follow. However, Fong was worried and had to follow to take a look. He didn't know what the situation was like in the shop, so he didn't feel at ease staying in the stockade. At the entrance of the Rui workshop, there were only 2 young maidservants left. After waiting for more than an hour, the young maidservant lost her patience. Looks like the shop won't be open in the morning. The 2 maidservants looked at the sky and saw that it was almost noon. They shook their heads and said. Although they couldn't buy the Rui nectar and couldn't report back, it wasn't their fault that the shop wasn't open. They would come back tomorrow. The 2 of them came to an agreement and were about to leave when they saw a familiar figure walking towards them from the other side of the street. Isn't that the shopkeeper we saw yesterday? One of the maidservants said in surprise. Yes, that's the young master. The other young maidservant immediately said. Yesterday, when they accompanied their madam to buy rouge and face powder on the streets, they accidentally discovered a newly opened shop. Out of curiosity, they walked in. The 2 maidservants didn't have a deep impression of this shop, but the handsome shopkeeper in the shop made them remember him. Since this young master had arrived, the prosperity lane should be open for business soon. The 2 servant girls felt a trace of joy in their hearts. They were glad that they did not leave too early. Li Yi didn't notice the 2 young maidservants at the entrance of the shop. He was thinking about something else. When he opened the door and saw the 2 young maidservants walking in behind him, he finally realized something. These 2 young maidservants were here to buy the Rui nectar. One of the young maidservants looked up at him and said in a clear voice. Fong, who was following behind, walked into the shop and saw the scene in front of him. His expression was a little stunned. Didn't the young master say that the business of the Rui nectar wasn't good and no one bought it? What was going on? These 2 maidservants seemed to have been waiting at the entrance for a long time. They were actually here to buy the Rui nectar? Li Yi just realized that the 2 maidservants in front of him looked a little familiar. After some thought, he remembered that the woman who bought the Rui nectar yesterday had 2 maidservants with her. Weren't they the 2 in front of him? Why did everyone come running here today? Then what should I do? The maidservant revealed a bitter expression. Just now, when the door of the shop didn't open, she got bored waiting and strolled around the street. She didn't expect that when she came back, the Rui nectar was already sold out. How about this? You can pay half of the deposit first. When we have new stock tomorrow, we will keep it for you. You can come back tomorrow morning to collect it. Li Yi looked at her and said. The maidservant thought about it and could only nod in agreement. She wasn't afraid that they would take the deposit and run away. After all, their shop was here. In the prefectural city, cheating people of deposits was very rare. Then. I want 10 bottles. I'll give you 5 taels of silver. The maidservant took out 5 taels of silver from her pouch and raised her head. What, a few bottles? Fong's eyes widened as he saw the maidservant put the silver on the counter indifferently. He was surprised. Were all the people in the prefectural city so rich? Li Yi didn't have time to accompany Fong in a daze. He took the deposit and wrote on a piece of paper, 10 bottles of floral water, 5 taels of deposit paid. He signed his name in the lower right corner and handed it to the maidservant. After several embarrassing scenes, Li Yi felt that the unique handwriting of his previous life was better appreciated by him alone. When writing on the paper, he used Wang Shiji's semi-cursive script, which was the only one in the world. The signature was similar to the artistic calligraphy of later generations, so he wasn't afraid that someone would take it and imitate it. The maidservant put away the paper and looked up at the handsome shopkeeper's face. She vaguely felt that it was a little familiar. With doubts in her heart, she walked out of the shop. "Young master, what should we do now?" Fong looked at Li Yi excitedly and asked. Li Yi glanced at him and said with some annoyance, "What else can we do?" "Of course, increase production." Just when they closed the shop and planned to go back to the stockade, the maidservant had already returned home. The moment she stepped through the door, there seemed to be a flash of light in her mind. That young master just now seems to be, in the maidservant's mind, she couldn't help but think of a certain night not long ago. In the Mianxiu garden, at the mid-autumn poetry meet, she went to invite that scholar under the instruction of her mistress and fought with other maidservants until her face turned red. Chapter 111. At this moment, in a garden in the inner courtyard of the mansion, a few young women were gathered together and whispering. "That Rui Du, is it really that magical?" The Qin girl told them what happened last night, and the woman next to her asked in disbelief. The other woman said, "Yuning is probably exaggerating. Ever since autumn, mosquitoes have been rampant, and we've tried all kinds of methods. Why haven't we heard of this Rui Du?" For women, rampant mosquitoes were really annoying after autumn. A few close friends were talking, and the woman called Qin Yuning mentioned a strange thing called Rui Du that they had never heard of before. This piqued their curiosity. "Is that thing really as good as the shopkeeper said?" The woman who went out with the Qin girl yesterday looked at her with surprise and asked. "Whether it's useful or not, you'll know after you try it." Chen Yuning didn't explain much. She turned around and said with confusion, "What's wrong with Xiu today? She's gone for so long, why isn't she back yet?" Just as she was thinking about it, the figure of her personal servant girl finally appeared in her line of sight. Seeing the servant girl walk over empty-handed, a confused expression appeared on her face, and she asked, "Where's the thing I told you to buy?" The servant girl had a bitter expression and said innocently, "Miss, when I found the Rui workshop, the shopkeeper said that Rui Du was sold out. But I already told them that they will keep the Rui Du for us tomorrow. At that time, Xiu can go get it." The Qin girl looked at her suspiciously and asked, "How could it be sold out so early? Honestly, did you just slack off and go shopping?" The servant girl couldn't help but feel a bit guilty after being seen through so quickly. She quickly changed the topic and said, "That's right, miss, I went to the Rui workshop today and found something else." "What is it?" The servant girl's trick was indeed effective. The Qin girl was curious, and she asked with some confusion. The surrounding women were clearly interested in this matter as well, and they all turned to look at the young servant girl. Thinking of that incident, the servant girl was still a little surprised and said, "The shopkeeper of the Rui workshop seems to be Li. Which Li?" Hearing this, the woman surnamed Shin became even more curious in her heart. "Li? The shopkeeper of Rui Square? What's going on?" The reactions of the surrounding women seemed to be even more intense than hers, all of them revealing expressions of curiosity. Li, could it be that our eldest daughter of the Qin family has finally fallen in love with the mundane world? Hearing their nonsense, the girls surnamed Qin glared at them. She then looked at the young maidservant and asked, "Why are you beating around the bush? Tell me, what's going on with this Li guy?" Hearing this, the young servant girl said with some grievance, "It's the Li that Miss asked me to invite to the mid-autumn poetry meet. Miss, have you forgotten?" She secretly complained in her heart, "Miss is really heartless." That day, she clearly liked Li very much. How long has it been, and now she doesn't even remember what he looks like. Mid-autumn poetry meet, banquet. The expression on the pretty face of the girl surnamed Qin froze, and then she seemed to remember something. She asked with some surprise, "You mean that Li?" At the mid-autumn poetry meet, she had sent Xiu to invite only one scholar. Naturally, she quickly remembered. Could it be that the handsome gentleman she saw yesterday was the Li from The Immortal at the Magpie Bridge and Shueidyogetu? On the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival, although she was shocked by Li's talent, she really didn't see his face. She only heard the people around her say that Li was both talented and good-looking. There were few scholars in Qingham Prefecture who could compare. She was still regretful that she hadn't seen his face. She didn't think that yesterday at the Rui Lane, she didn't recognize that Li when she saw him. What Li? Who is Li? Yes, tell us quickly, don't keep us in suspense. Seeing the expression on Qin Yuning's face, the surrounding girls were even more confused. Their hearts were stifled and they all asked questions. It's that Li from Shueidyogetu, Li. The young servant girl looked at them and said with some confusion. In her heart, she was curious. What was wrong with them? A few days ago, they kept talking about that Li and read his poems all day long. Why did they all seem to have amnesia? It looked like the young ladies of these large families were all fickle people. As she thought this, when she looked at the other young ladies again, the young servant girl couldn't help but be startled. She was so frightened by the light in their eyes that she took several steps back. Next to the Rui Lane, the owner of the cloth shop slowly walked out of his shop and looked at the shop opposite. In the past 2 days, he had done this action countless times. He didn't know when, but the door that had been closed for a day had been opened. It had to be said that the shop opposite was really strange. It had only been open for a day the day before yesterday and had been open for a little less than an hour yesterday. After that, he hadn't seen the shopkeeper appear again. Could it be that because business wasn't good, he gave up? The more the fat shopkeeper thought about it, the more likely it seemed. That shopkeeper looked more like a scholar than a businessman. He opened the shop but didn't advertise. Customers didn't even know what was sold inside. How could there be business? The rent for this shop probably cost 1 tael of silver a day. No business meant a loss. He wanted to see how long this shop could stay open for. When this shop really couldn't stay open any longer, he could talk to the scholar and perhaps he could rent it out at a low price. At that time, the cloth shop could expand. Presumably, business would be better. If business was better, he could consider opening a few more shops and hire a few more workers. He could retreat behind the scenes and count his silver. If he could become the largest cloth merchant in Qing and prefectural city in his lifetime, he would have no regrets in this life. Not far away, a dozen or so women walked in this direction in a group. The fat shopkeeper saw clearly that these women were coming in the direction of the cloth shop. A smile immediately appeared on his face. So many customers had come early in the morning. The cloth shop's business was booming. He would talk to the scholar tomorrow. If he was willing to sell this shop, the price could be discussed. This way, he would be 1 step closer to his dream. Thinking of this, the smile on the fat shopkeeper's face became even more radiant. Chapter 112. Ladies, come in and have a look. Our shop just got a new batch yesterday. The fat shopkeeper greeted them with a smile. He watched these women walk past him and stop in front of the shop next door. The fat shopkeeper had already made an inviting gesture. The smile on his face froze. He stood there stupidly, like a statue standing in the autumn morning breeze. This is Rui Workshop. The group of women stood at the entrance of the shop, and when they saw the 3 words on the signboard, a few of them immediately revealed shocked expressions. Flowing like the clouds and flowing water, lively and lively, just like a swimming dragon. The style of these 3 words is already unique, but I've never heard of it before. Could it be that young Master Li created it himself? Hearing this, a woman asked doubtfully, but didn't they all say that Li's literary talent is brilliant, but his calligraphy is unsightly? It's just a rumor. It may not be credible. Another woman curled her lips and said, scholars have always despised each other. They are jealous of Lee's talent, so it's not strange for them to belittle him. Several women discussed in a low voice at the door. Suddenly, one of them turned around and looked at the figure standing stiffly in the wind. She asked doubtfully, "What happened to him?" "A new batch of new goods." The owner of the cloth shop said what he didn't finish just now in a daze. In the autumn wind, only the sound of heartbreak could be heard. Inside the shop, Lee had just put the new batch of Ruidu that he had rushed to make yesterday on the counter. He was planning how to promote it after today. In the past 2 days, he had crammed some knowledge about business and sales. Now, he was no longer as ignorant as he used to be. Ruidu was a new thing that had never been seen before in this world. It was not easy for people here to accept it. There was a sound at the door. Li Yi turned his head and saw the girl who had paid the deposit yesterday coming in from outside. She should be here to take the Ruidu. He stood up from his seat. Just as he took a step forward, he was stunned on the spot before he could speak. Looking at the sudden appearance of more than a dozen women in the shop and their eager eyes, Li Yi's heart trembled. He suddenly felt like a sheep entering a pack of wolves. What's going on? Could it be they are going to rob me? It's over. Li Yi felt some regret. If he had known that the security in Qin and prefecture was so bad, he should have brought Fong here today. It didn't seem like a good idea. Fong could handle several men at once. As for women, thinking of his cowardly manner in front of his wife, it was very likely that he couldn't handle such a big scene. If only Rui was here. At the very least, he wouldn't be in such a passive position. While Li Yi was observing these women, they were also observing him. Chapter 113. Li Yi thought hard for a long time to come up with a marketing strategy, but he didn't use it after all. In the last few days, the number of customers in Rui workshop suddenly increased. Every day before noon, the Ruidu produced in a hurry the day before was sold out. Most of the customers were women, and their clothes and temperament were all extraordinary. They didn't look like ordinary people. From this point of view, those women were really trustworthy, and he didn't waste the 10% discount he gave them. The only thing he couldn't stand was that some women looked at him in a strange way after entering the store. Every time he thought about it, he got goosebumps. Apart from that, there were also some elegant scholars who bought the Ruidu. Scholars who studied all day would inevitably feel dizzy. There were only a few people who could lift their heads and prick their buttocks to keep their spirits up, and they were the ones who didn't have the money to buy the Ruidu. For those rich scholars, they could spend 1 tael of silver to buy a bottle of Ruidu. When they were tired from reading, they could drop a few drops and instantly feel energetic. Their recitation efficiency would skyrocket. It was as if God was helping them. Of course, they wouldn't feel bad about spending 1 tael of silver. Fong's smile never disappeared from his face. The number of customers increased day by day. According to the current situation, the market should be far from saturated. Li Yi did not take the opportunity to rush the production and pass off shoddy goods as quality goods. Before he ran out of money, it was more important to build up his reputation. This was only the first product launched by Rui Lane. Only by building up his reputation could he earn more money in the future. Of course, the rarer something is, the more expensive it is. If Ruidu was as abundant as plain water, only a fool would spend 1 tael of silver to buy it. With the increase of customers, Li Yi and Xiao Huan were obviously too busy to take care of all the customers at the same time. For the past 2 days, he had been thinking in his heart whether he should recruit more people or not. The business of Rui's workshop was already on the right track. If he had to do all the small things himself, it would go against his original intention. Making money was only for the sake of accumulating original capital and using the fastest time to embark on the path of retirement. In order to make money, he had to wake up earlier than the chickens and sleep later than the dogs. He had never been so tired in his previous life. It was not worth it. Rui Workshop's business was booming. Every day, before noon, it would be sold out and closed for the day. Naturally, it attracted the attention of many people. Of course, the people who felt it the most were the surrounding shops. One was as crowded as a marketplace, while the other was completely deserted. After asking around, they found out that the newly opened shop was selling a small bottle of Rui nectar for 1 tael of silver. What was even more surprising was that there were actually so many people who went to buy it. As for the effects of the Rui dew, they had also seen it from the signboard at the entrance. Wasn't slapping myself twice more effective than the Rui dew? It repels mosquitoes and relieves the itch. What's wrong with being bitten twice by mosquitoes? You're actually spending a tael of silver to buy this thing. Prevents diseases. Nonsense. What kind of panacea do you think you're selling? However, after hearing about it, they only curled their lips and felt that no one would buy it. Just like that, it successfully squeezed into the circle of Qing and Prefecture's socialites. It became the new favorite of the young ladies of Qing and Prefecture. Even the scholars of Qing and Prefecture held it in high esteem. This caused the business of Rui Workshop to flourish day by day. Of course, this was not without its disadvantages. After all, the customers who came out of the shop would sometimes walk around the surrounding shops and buy things when they were in a good mood. This caused their business to increase. Their profits increased by more than 10%. Regarding this, the shopkeepers felt extremely complicated. They didn't know whether they should be happy or worried. At noon, the sun had not yet risen above their heads. In Rui Workshop, Li had already sold the last bottle of Rui dew. At the entrance of the shop, he hung a "sold out today" sign. He sat on a chair tiredly. Xiao Wan walked over from the side and placed her small hand on his shoulder, gently massaging it. His eyes stared ahead in a daze, as if he had a lot on his mind. When the first girl secretly gave him the handkerchief embroidered with mandarin ducks and Immortals of the Magpie Bridge, Li Yi realized that something was wrong. Later, he saw a few girls secretly fighting over an order that he had personally written. The board on the door was stolen by someone in the middle of the night. It was replaced with a new one, and within 2 days, it was stolen again. At this time, he finally understood that he had most likely been exposed. The spread of Immortals of the Magpie Bridge was purely accidental. As for Shuidiao, it was purely forced by that Shinjiao. He had not the slightest bit of precaution and had inexplicably become so popular. Li Yi expressed his innocence. He only wanted to do a small business. He didn't want to become some #1 scholar. Compared to this title, it was more practical to give him a few hundred taels of silver. He was half happy and half worried. Although his peaceful life had been disturbed, it wasn't completely without benefits. The booming business of Rui Workshop was most likely due to the fame brought about by the 2 poems. After all, in this world, the effect of a scholar was equivalent to the effect of a celebrity in the future. If Yang Yanzhou held a small porcelain bottle and said a few lines, "Rui nectar, women say it's good after using it," and put up such an advertisement, perhaps even the Dorzil of this place would be trampled to pieces by the women who admired him. Of course, with Li Yi's current fame, if he personally stood up to promote Rui Workshop, the effect would probably be even better. Then, he would throw out a few famous poems, famous paintings from past dynasties, and a copy of Wang Shiji's preface to the Orchid Pavilion. He would hang them on the wall. Anyone who wanted to enter the shop would have to pay 1 tael of silver. Never underestimate the temptation of these things to scholars. Although this was extremely vulgar, Li Yi did not doubt that there would still be countless people flocking to the shop. Up until now, earning money was still his main goal in life. However, Li Yi could not accept this kind of immoral way of earning money with a clear conscience for the time being. The most difficult and stressful period had passed. The shop's business should be stable for a while. Li Yi also finally let out a sigh of relief. It was time to give himself a break and relax. The little servant girl stood behind Li Yi. The strength of her hand was gentle. She could see that the son-in-law was thinking about something. She slowed down her breathing and tried not to make a sound. However, the smile on the corner of her mouth could not be concealed. The matters of Rui workshop had always been handled by her and Li Yi. When she thought of something, her eyes turned into crescent moons. These days, son-in-law has earned a lot of money. Chapter 114. In less than half a day, the new batch of Rui nectar was sold out again. Even the prepaid order was 7 days later. Li Yi closed the shop as usual and went back to the stockade village with the little maid. Not long after, a carriage left the shop. After driving out of the mansion, it went straight along the official road. After a little more than 15 minutes, it arrived at the foot of Green Willow Mountain. If they didn't continue along the official road, it would be a rugged mountain road. The carriage would be difficult to travel. The young coachman jumped off the carriage, turned around and said loudly, "Sir, we've arrived." The curtain of the carriage opened. Li Yi took Xiaohuan's hand and got off the carriage. He took out 10 copper coins from his waist and handed it to the coachman. He said, "Tomorrow is the same time. Remember to wait here." "Okay." The coachman put away the copper coins and said with a silly smile, "Sir, don't worry. I will wait here for you tomorrow morning. I won't delay your business." For this coachman, the young master in front of him was already a regular customer. The business of the carriage shop was not very good. He was naturally satisfied with a stable customer who would rent a carriage twice a day. Li Yi waved his hand and watched the coachman drive away. He walked towards the stockade village with the little maid. Between Willow Leaf Village in Qing and Prefecture, except for this section of mountain road, there were mostly flat roads that could be used by carriages. Renting a carriage could save more than half of the time compared to walking. Although the carriage was a little bumpy on the official road after leaving the prefectural city, it was not too violent. Since Li Yi knew that there was such a business as driving a carriage in the prefectural city, he often used this means of transportation. For ordinary people, in order to save 10 copper coins, they would rather choose to walk. But now the business of Rui workshop was so good that he could earn dozens of silver coins every day. He didn't need to save money in these places. What's more, the time saved was enough for him to create more than 10 copper coins. After walking on the mountain road for less than an hour, they could see the stockade village. Not long after entering the stockade village, they saw Fong surrounded by a few girls. He looked embarrassed and didn't know what happened. Today, Fong was the most successful man in the Willow Leaf Village except for Li Yi. He was envied by countless people. Li Yi was a lazy person. After the business of the candied haws and the workshop went on the right track, he completely let go and let Fong take charge. Now, even the direct descendants of the Liu family had to act according to Fong's wishes. In the eyes of others, he was naturally awe-inspiring. More than once, Li Yi had seen several women gathered together and talked about how much virtue Fong's wife had accumulated in her previous life to be able to marry such a capable man. Their words were full of admiration for Fong, just like an older fangirl. Of course, Li Yi had never mentioned this to Fong. He did not want him to get carried away and harm a married woman. He did not want to cause a tragedy and destroy the harmony and stability of the stronghold. However, this was only limited to those women. When with these girls also, this made Li Yi a little hard to imagine. Did he really underestimate Fong's charm before? "Uncle Fong, please help us." The girls looked at Fong and begged. Fong was never good at dealing with women. Being surrounded by so many girls, he could not help but feel a headache. He said with an embarrassed face, "It's not that I don't want to help you, but there is no shortage of people in the Candid House factory. You can't help much even if you go there." The work in the workshop is not something that you girls can do. We have nothing to do at home all day. Uncle Fong, please help us. There are many things we can do. Yes, Uncle Fong, I beg you. Only Uncle Fong could help them with this matter. The girls did not give up and continued to beg. When the voices entered his ears, Fong felt a headache again. He glanced around and suddenly saw a familiar figure walking towards him. As if he had been granted amnesty, he immediately strode over. Son-in-law, you're back. Brother-in-law. Seeing Li Yi, the girls also bowed in a reserved manner. What's going on? Li Yi looked at Fong and asked with some doubt. These children don't want to stay in the village. They insisted that I find some work for them. Fong looked at Li Yi and said helplessly, there is no shortage of people in the candied house factory. As for the workshop, as you know, son-in-law, Li Yi nodded. After the direct descendants of the Liu family joined, the candied house business had reached a saturation point. As for the workshop, no one was allowed to go near it on normal days. The biggest reason was confidentiality. Another reason was because of safety issues. The workshop involved alcohol and fire, so it was not suitable for these women. In my opinion, women should stay in the village, cook, and take care of the house. It's really not suitable for them to go out and show their faces. Fong looked up at Li Yi and asked, son-in-law, don't you think so? When the girls beside Fong heard this, a look of disappointment appeared on their pretty faces. They could not help but lower their heads. Uncle Fong was right. As women, especially unmarried women, they should be respectful and not show their faces in public. However, their parents were busy at home. Even Sister Chin was teaching the children in the school. It seemed that everyone had something to do, but they were the only ones idling around at home. Naturally, they did not feel good about it. Li Yi glanced at Fong. For these girls to make such a request, they were much more ambitious than Fong. He turned to look at them and said with a smile, it just so happens that Workshop has been very busy recently. If you are willing, you can go there and help out. Son-in-law, this. Fong looked up at Li Yi with a face full of surprise. Really? The girls looked up with the same look of disbelief. Li Yi nodded and said, the shops in the prefectural city have been very busy recently. You can go to the shops tomorrow after you pack up today. He did not expect these girls to have such intentions. However, he had already planned to hire people. These girls were his people and could be trusted. Instead of hiring a few outsiders, it was better to let them go. Thank you, brother-in-law. The girls were overjoyed. Their pretty faces immediately bloomed with smiles as they quickly thanked him. Of course, this matter must first be approved by your families. Seeing their excited expressions, Li Yi added. One of the girls smiled and said, don't worry, brother-in-law. They have already agreed. Since their families had agreed, Li Yi naturally did not have any objections. He went to the workshop to take a look and instructed Fong and the rest to hurry up with the production of the new batch of Ruidu. Previously, he did not expect that the Ruidu would be in such short supply. When the funds were sufficient and they could start producing spirits, such a small workshop would not be able to meet the production requirements. By that time, even the manpower would be insufficient. Chapter 115. After returning to the stockade village, he first went to the workshop that made Rui's nectar. The autumn weather was a bit chilly, but in the workshop, several men topless were working in full swing. Although their daily work was very simple, they obviously didn't feel bored and were full of energy at all times. It was no wonder. What they did here was not tiring work. It was much easier than herding horses or doing farm work. Not only that, they had meat to eat and wine to drink every day. At night, they could sit on the kong with their wives and count the money. After counting the money, they would hide it. When they were in the mood, they could do something shameless. Life was very comfortable. Li Yi stood outside the workshop and looked at it from afar. Everything was normal, so he turned around and walked in the direction of his home. When he reached the door, he smelled a faint aroma of food before he stepped into the yard. Xiao Huan went to the shop with him in the morning, so it was naturally not her cooking. Mississippi Lu, not to mention that she didn't know how to cook, even if she did, Li Yi might not dare to eat it. In the past, it was Xiao Huan or himself who cooked, so Li Yi subconsciously thought that the two sisters didn't know how to cook. It was not until a few days ago that he found out that Rui also had extraordinary cooking skills. Even Xiao Huan, who had learned some of his skills, couldn't compare. Later, it was Xiao Huan who told him that before the old master left, when Xiao Huan and second miss were young, it was always the eldest miss who cooked. Xiao Huan learned most of her cooking skills from her. If it was in the future, she would probably be the kind of girl who was good-tempered, had extraordinary cooking skills, and had a black belt in Taekwondo. She would be the goddess in the hearts of countless men, and of course, she was also the ideal type for Li Yi. But at that time, he couldn't be more ordinary. This kind of goddess-like girl probably wouldn't even look him in the eye. Now that he thought about it, in his previous life, he often gave up his seat to old people on the bus, occasionally helped old grannies cross the road, and was willing to help others without pocketing the money he picked up. In the end, there were rewards. "My husband, you're back. After you've washed your hands, come and eat." As soon as Li Yi stepped into the courtyard, he heard a gentle voice. After living together for so long, Lu Rui was no longer surprised by Li Yi's habit of washing his hands before eating. Recently, Li Yi came back around this time every day. By the time he reached home, the meal was already prepared. The feeling of always having someone waiting for him at home was very good. Not far away, Xiao Huan had already taken the initiative to fetch water for him. An imperceptible smile appeared on Li Yi's face as he strode over. "Brother Qian, you seem to be in a hurry. Where are you going?" "Rui Square." As soon as his words left his mouth, it immediately resonated with the people around him. "That's right, shopkeeper. The goods every day are really too little. I placed an order 2 days ago and only received it today." "What, 2 days ago? Did you cut the queue?" "I placed an order 7 days ago." Li Yi stretched out his hand and gestured for the crowd to be quiet. He then explained, "Everyone may not know this, but the production process of this Rui Du is quite complicated. We work day and night, but we can only produce a few dozen bottles a day. If we produce more, I'm afraid that the efficacy will decrease." The crowd was obviously very satisfied with this explanation. The Rui Du was a strange item that had never been seen before. It was normal for the production process to be complicated. No wonder it was so expensive to sell it for 1 tael of silver. And this shopkeeper was obviously a merchant with a conscience. In order to not reduce the efficacy of the Rui Du, he was willing to earn so much money. He was really a model for other shops. For a moment, the crowd couldn't help but look at him with respect. After a while, the customer who received the Rui Du left with satisfaction. The crowd who placed the order and could only pick up the goods after a few days were not too dissatisfied. After all, where could they find a shopkeeper who was so considerate to them? It was fine to wait for a few days as long as the quality of the goods was guaranteed. Seeing that there were not many Rui Du left and a thick stack of orders on the counter, Fong couldn't hide the silly smile on his face. He glanced at the door and saw someone coming in, so he hurriedly walked over. "I'm sorry, today's Rui Du is sold out. If you didn't place an order in advance, you can only place an order and pick up the goods after a few days." "Are you the shopkeeper here?" The person who came was a young man. He glanced sideways at Fong, and a trace of disdain appeared in his eyes when he saw his clothes. "Didn't you hear the young master asking you a question? Are you the shopkeeper here?" The 2 young men behind the young man glared at Fong when they saw that he didn't speak. Seeing the disdainful expression on the young man's face and the arrogant look of the two people behind him, Fong narrowed his eyes. These people didn't come with good intentions. Chapter 116. What are you doing? Fong crossed his arms and stared at them with wide eyes. An invisible force pressed towards them. Since they were not customers and seemed to be here to cause trouble, Fong did not stand on ceremony with them. Putting aside the fact that Fong had a foundation in martial arts, being stared at by such a burly man was very oppressive. Normal people would feel a bit scared if they saw this. Fong's ox-like eyes glared and a chill suddenly rose in the young man's heart. He couldn't help but take a few steps back. After he came to his senses, he felt a bit angry, but he didn't dare to glare at him. He suddenly raised his voice. Who is the shopkeeper of Rui Workshop? Li Yi had actually been paying attention to this side since they entered the door. At this time, he stood up and slowly walked over. He looked at the young man indifferently and asked, "What is it?" "You are the shopkeeper of Rui Workshop." The young man looked at him with surprise. He didn't think that the famous shopkeeper of Rui Workshop in Qing and Prefectural City would be such a young scholar. "What is it? Speak." The young man in front of him, from his expression to his attitude, was full of the appearance of a playboy. He didn't look like he was in business. If it wasn't for the principle that those who came were guests, Li Yi wouldn't have bothered with him. "Our young master is looking for you." "Of course it's a good thing." The young man didn't say anything. Another young man beside him spoke up. "Our young master will buy the recipe for your Rui Du for 1,000 liang of silver." After the young man finished speaking, a faint smile appeared on the young man's face. He had a card up his sleeve. 1,000 liang of silver. They had probably never seen so much silver in their lives. A mere formula could be sold for 1,000 taels of silver. The young man was waiting for the poor scholar to be deeply grateful to him. Then, he would respectfully hand over the formula of the Rui Du. That way, he would have achieved his goal. Recently, this thing called Rui Du had spread among the social circles of Qing and Prefectural City's young ladies and scholars. Everyone fought to buy it and it had become a fashion trend. However, the store only supplied a few dozen bottles a day. There were so many scholars and beautiful women in Qing and Prefectural City. Most people wanted to buy it but couldn't. After he bought a bottle through various channels, he personally tried it and immediately realized the value it contained. In the summer, it was cool and refreshing, and in the autumn, it repelled mosquitoes and insects. When one was tired, a few drops would immediately refresh one's mind and increase one's vigor. The effects of the Rui Du were just like its name, extremely miraculous. In his opinion, this small shop in Qing and Prefectural City was far from enough. If he opened a few more shops, how much profit would he be able to make? If he opened the store in the capital and entered the circle of true nobles, he could already see a mountain of silver floating in front of him. Of course, all of this was under the premise that he could successfully obtain the recipe for Rui Du. However, he was not worried about this. Before he came, he had already investigated the owner of this store. He was a commoner with no background. If the other party was unwilling, he had countless ways to achieve his goal. Fong. As soon as Li Yi spoke, Fong immediately straightened his body. "See the guest out." Li Yi said lightly and turned to walk in the direction of the counter. 1,000 liang of silver for the recipe for Rui Du. Even if this number was increased by 10 times, or 100 times, he still wouldn't agree. Whether it was the Rui Du or the perfume and spirits that were still in the planning stages, the core technology was alcohol distillation. This was related to his future business. Li Yi couldn't sell distillation. "Gentlemen, please." Fong stood in front of the three and said coldly. 1,000 liang of silver for the recipe for Rui Du. Dream on. Although Fong was a bit stupid, he was not a fool. According to the store's recent income, he could earn 1,000 liang of silver in less than a month. Even if Li Yi agreed to sell the recipe for 1,000 liang of silver, Fong would not agree. The change happened too quickly. The young man couldn't react in time, and his smile froze on his face. Things were a little different from what he had expected. In his previous view, if the other party was not tactful and didn't want to sell the recipe, he could increase the price. He could also accept 2,000 liang of silver. If the other party didn't know what was good for him and brought up his identity, then everything would be settled. But who would have thought that this scholar wouldn't even give him a chance to bring up his identity? He turned hostile like flipping a book. How dare you? Do you know that my master is? A young man beside the young man revealed an angry expression. He had just opened his mouth to say a few words when he was glared at by Fong. Fong didn't care who this guy was. Even if the county magistrate was here, he had to be reasonable. Whoever wanted to rob Fong of his money was his enemy. He clenched his fist and revealed a fierce expression. He said fiercely, "If you don't leave, I will personally send you out." Seeing the burly man in front of them clenching his joints so hard that they made cracking sounds, the three of them turned pale and couldn't help but take a few steps back. The young man raised his head and said coldly, "In this prefecture city, it's best to lower your heads. Otherwise, you won't even know how you die. How dare you threaten me?" A trace of anger appeared on Fong's face. He casually picked up a chair beside him. The young man was about to say something, but he was dragged away by the two young men beside him. "You run fast. If I see you again, I will break your legs," Fong said fiercely. He looked at the backs of the three fleeing figures and put down the chair heavily. "These bastards wanted to buy our formula for 1,000 taels of silver. Why didn't they just rob?" Fong was still angry even after the three of them had left for a long time. Li Yi sat behind the counter and looked thoughtfully at the bustling pedestrians on the street outside. Today's foppish young master had also given him a reminder. An ordinary man is innocent, but a man's wealth is a crime. The profits of the Rui Du were huge, and as time passed, it would definitely attract the attention of more people. Even in the future, this kind of robbery was common. Not to mention in this era, for some people, the restriction of the law was extremely low. Moreover, the launch of Rui Du was only the first step. If the business became bigger in the future, it was hard to guarantee that it wouldn't be targeted by more people. At that time, what should he do? After all, he was just a commoner. If he really encountered such a thing, should he let Fong beat them up? Beat them up? Or beat them up? Obviously, this was not the solution to the problem. An individual's martial strength was completely useless at this time. Just as Li Yi thought of this and frowned, someone walked in from the entrance of the shop. Inside the shop, Li Yi looked around for a moment. After a while, he withdrew his gaze and said to Li Yi, "That Rui Du, give me 100 bottles first. I will take them with me when I leave." Last time, he heard from Li Yi that he was going to open a shop in Qing and Prefecture to sell Rui Du. He was curious for a while about what this Rui Du was. Later, because he was busy with other things, he temporarily forgot about it. Recently, Li Xian had also heard about the Rui Du that was popular in the circle of socialites and scholars. In his heart, he did not believe that the two were the same thing. He heard that it had the effect of repelling mosquitoes. Today, he wanted to buy some to show his filial piety to the princess. Only then did he find that the shopkeeper of the shop was actually Li Yi. 100 bottles. Li Yi glanced at him. "Don't even mention 100 bottles, there isn't even a single bottle. Today's Rui Du has already been sold out, and the order list is 7 days later. If you want to get your hands on the Rui Du, you'll have to wait at least 7 days. What's more, Rui Du can only be bought at most 20 bottles at a time." This rule was set by Li Yi. The purpose was to prevent some people from buying a large amount of ruidu and then reselling it at a high price. 7 days. Li Xian was stunned for a moment, then directly shook his head and said, 7 days is too long. I can't wait that long. He reached out and patted Li Yi on the shoulder. His eyes were bright. Although he did not say anything, the meaning was already very clear. After all, the two of them were friends who went to the brothel together. If he did not even help this little bit, it would be a little too unfriendly. Li Yi sighed and said, the production process of ruidu is very complicated. It takes several hours to produce a bottle of ruidu. What's more, we lack manpower, so it is impossible to produce a large amount. What's so difficult? Can't I find some people from the prince's mansion to help you? Li Xian was stunned for a moment, then he waved his hand, indicating that this was not a problem at all. Li Yi shook his head, having manpower is not enough. To produce ruidu, not only do we need to build a workshop, but we also need to buy raw materials, which requires a lot of money. What's more, we can't put all our energy into ruidu. Rui Workshop is about to start releasing perfume and spirits, so we also need manpower. I don't need to trouble you with these things. I'll ask them to speed up the work. In 3 days, we can't gather 100 bottles of ruidu, but there will be 50 bottles. You can send someone to pick it up at that time. Perfume. The expression on Li Xian's face was stunned. What is this? A puzzled expression flashed across his face. He turned to look at Li Yi and murmured, spirits, how strong is it? Li Yi took a small porcelain bottle from the counter and opened the lid. A very strong wine fragrance floated out of the bottle. This was the alcohol obtained after more than 10 times of distillation. Although it had been blended, the alcohol content was still several times higher than the so-called spirits on the market. Good wine. As the wine fragrance entered his nose, an abnormal blush appeared on Li Xian's face. His body swayed, and he grabbed the counter. He looked at Li Yi and said with burning eyes, I'll help you with the manpower and workshop. You just need to tell me how this spirit is brewed, and, that perfume, what is it? Li Yi couldn't understand why a person with such a poor alcohol tolerance would be so interested in hard liquor. However, this wasn't important to him. He looked at Li Xian with a smile and said, how could I let you work for free? Why don't we consider this business a partnership? We'll split the profits 50-50. How about that? That's a good idea. Li Xian heard this, and after a moment of daze, he nodded without hesitation. He didn't want to accept other people's kindness for free. He was originally a greedy person, but he would rather give up 50% of the profits. He really didn't misjudge him. Outside the door, the leading man and Fong crossed their wrists to test their strength. Their faces were flushed, and fine beads of sweat appeared on their foreheads. On the contrary, Fong looked calm and there was a hint of mockery at the corner of his mouth. In terms of fighting, he might not be able to beat him, but in terms of strength, no one in the whole Willow Leaves village could beat him. His opponent was still far behind. Next to the two of them, the faces of the few men revealed a bit of shock. Their leader was known for his strength, but compared to this big man, it was obvious that he was far from enough. Where did this monster come from? Gulp. At this time, a strong wine fragrance floated out of the shop. Except for Fong, everyone couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Chapter 118. When the young prince, Li Xian, left with those people, he took 10 bottles of ruidu. Although it was announced that ruidu had long been sold out, there had to be some spares left in the shop. This time, Li Yi simply let him take all of it. After his step-by-step seduction, the final goal was achieved. Li Yi watched as the group left, and the smile on his face brightened. Originally, he had only wanted to start a small business. Under the condition that he wouldn't starve, he wanted to raise the standard of living a little, and at the same time, he wanted to lead Fong and the others into a well-off life. Originally, the Rui workshop and the candied house business could satisfy this small wish. However, in the Jianghu, some things were not as simple as they seemed. The business of Rui Do was a large cake. There were probably countless people watching from afar, wanting a piece of it. Li Yi was just a commoner. He didn't want to compromise, but he also couldn't fight against the local snake in Qing and Fu. With no other choice, he could only choose to hug a thicker thigh. In Qing and Fu, there was no thigh that was thicker than Ning Wang Fu's thigh. If the business wanted to grow, it needed more manpower, resources, and financial resources. It was clearly impossible to rely on just Fong and the others. They could only find others to cooperate with. Cooperating with Ning Wang Fu was clearly the most suitable and the best way to solve the problem once and for all. In this small piece of land, no one dared to compete with Ning Wang Fu for business. He only needed to contribute the recipe, and then he could sit at home and count the money. Although he was using the curiosity of the young prince, this was a win-win situation. The profits of Rui Du were considerable. Furthermore, Li Yi also planned to work with him for a long time. Ning Wang Fu wouldn't lose out, and Li Yi could use this huge umbrella of protection to be a shopkeeper who didn't have to do anything. Of course, after interacting with the young prince a few times, Li Yi also found him to be quite pleasing to the eye. He was one of the few friends he acknowledged. They were all from the old Li family. To some extent, the goodies should be kept within the family. Now that his worries had been resolved, Li Xian went back to make preparations for the manpower, workshop, and shop. He could handle such a small matter by himself. In fact, when Li Yi suggested a 50-50 split, he didn't even think about it before agreeing. This caused Li Yi to admire him even more. The young man's thinking was very advanced. Originally, Li Yi wanted to explain to him about intellectual property rights, but now it seemed that there was no need for that. In the following time, he did some small training for the girls. It took a little time to teach them how to write orders. Although the format of the order was fixed and Li Yi could write it in advance, they had to fill in the delivery date and quantity by themselves. He needed to teach them how to write the number and date. Fong also had something to do. Of course, it was not enough to have only a few girls in the shop. If there were any bad customers or hooligans, Fong had to go out personally and temporarily act as a flower protector. Everyone had their own division of labor, so there was nothing for Li Yi to do. He made a cup of tea and lazily lay in the yard behind the shop. While basking in the sun, he looked for a few books in the library in his mind to recharge. In Jianghu, it was never a burden to have more skills. Maybe they would be useful one day. The position of this yard was facing the sun, and the sun was warm on the body. Li Yi closed his eyes and digested what he had just read. Suddenly, everything went black. When he opened his eyes, he saw Fong standing straight in front of him, just blocking the sun. "Son-in-law, someone is looking for you." Fong looked at Li Yi with a strange expression on his face. He wanted to say something but stopped. When Li Yi stood up, Fong added, "It is a beautiful woman." "And I got it." Li Yi nodded and turned to walk into the shop. Recently, there would occasionally be women coming over and asking him to write something on a piece of paper. He had long been used to it. Of course, there were some scholars in the beginning, but after they heard that he had to pay 1 tael of silver to write a word, gradually, no one came. Being able to enjoy the treatment of a star also made Li Yi's vanity a little satisfied. However, in Fong's view, it was not like this. "And I got it. What kind of attitude is this? There is a beautiful woman looking for him. Isn't he worried that I will tell the big miss?" A trace of hesitation appeared on Fong's face. After thinking about it, he still followed. Seeing that the young master was so calm, it did not seem like he had a guilty conscience. What if he was thinking too much? Li Yi walked into the shop from the back door. Several girls were practicing what he had just taught them at the counter. In the resting area opposite, a young woman was sitting there with a pretty maid standing behind her. The young woman seemed to be holding something in her hand. At this moment, all her attention was on the paintings around the wall, fascinated. Seeing the woman from afar, a trace of doubt appeared in Li Yi's eyes. He walked to the woman and asked, "May I know why Miss Sumo is here today?" He did not expect that the person who came here to find him was actually the top artist of the Jade Courtyard. Li Yi and she had some small misunderstandings before, but they had later reconciled. However, the two of them had only met twice at the poetry conference and had no further interaction. Zumo is here to return the painting to young master. Xing Zumo stood up, curtsied, and handed the thing in her hand to Li Yi. Painting. Seeing that she handed over a paper tube, Li Yi was even more puzzled. When did she take his painting? He turned to look at the surrounding walls. Not a single painting was missing. Puzzled, he untied the string in the middle of the paper tube and slowly arranged the paper tube on the table beside him. Seeing the painting of a woman in martial attire on the paper, the expression on Li Yi's face froze for an instant. Lu Rui, it was actually Lu Rui. The painting was three-dimensional, so it should have been drawn by him. However, he had only drawn Lu Rui once, and that painting was still locked in the cabinet in his room. But what was with the painting in front of him? I'm afraid that young master took the wrong painting that day. Please return the painting that you took away to me. Xing Zumo did not notice the change in Li Yi's expression and looked up at him. A strange feeling welled up in Xing Zumo's heart at the thought that her painting was in the hands of a man. Coincidentally, she heard that the scholar who defeated Shen Zhao in poetry was in this Rui workshop, so she immediately brought the painting over. However, Li Yi did not give Xing Zumo an answer. His mind was still a bit confused at the moment. If he had taken the wrong painting that day, if this painting had fallen into Xing Zumo's hands, then the painting he had taken away that day was actually her portrait. Li Yi raised his head and glanced at her. He finally realized that the reason why he felt a sense of familiarity when he saw her at the intoxicated fragrance house was not because he went to the Jadeite courtyard with Li Xian that night, but because he had seen her portrait at the art stall. Fang walked to Li Yi's side with doubt and looked at the table. After a moment of shock, his eyes suddenly widened, as if he had seen something extremely incredible. Young master actually secretly hid a portrait of second miss. A voice, like thunder, exploded in Fang's mind. Chapter 119. Fang stared blankly at the portrait on the table. His expression was blank, but his heart was in turmoil. He vaguely felt that he seemed to have accidentally discovered a great secret. Could it be that the son-in-law was still not satisfied with the first miss, and was still thinking about the second miss? In an instant, Fang's heart fell into endless anxiety and confusion. What to do, what to do? Should he tell the first miss, or should he tell the second miss? Since he already knew about this matter, he would be disloyal if he did not report it to the first miss. But betraying the son-in-law would be unjust, and it might even destroy a good family. Old Fang would not be the culprit who would destroy a family. Secretly tell the second miss. Forget it. For the safety of the son-in-law and his own life, it was best to never let the second miss know about this. Fang, who was caught in the choice of loyalty, had a very complicated look in his eyes, and the expression on his face kept changing. Young master. Young master. Xing Zumo finally noticed that something was wrong with Li Yi's expression and called out softly with some confusion. Li Yi came back to his senses and realized that he had made such a big mistake before. A man secretly hiding a woman's portrait. This was very thought-provoking. Fortunately, Rui and Xiao Huan did not see it. Otherwise, they would have thought that he had some improper thoughts about this Miss Sumo. I'm really sorry. After taking the portrait that day, I didn't open it. I didn't think that I had taken the wrong one. However, the portrait is not with me at this time. I will bring it tomorrow and give it to you. Li Yi looked at her and said apologetically. Thank you, young master. Xing Zumo nodded and said softly. Her eyes swept over the surrounding walls, and she wanted to say something but stopped. Is there anything else, Miss Zumo? Li Yi seemed to have something else to say and asked in confusion. A trace of hesitation appeared on Xing Zumo's face, and then she said, to be honest, Zumo would like to ask young master what kind of technique you use to make this portrait so lifelike. The person in the painting seems to be walking out of the painting. She didn't dare to look up at Li Yi. She knew that it was a bit abrupt to ask these questions at this moment. Painting techniques were the summarization of a person's experiences over a long period of time. To those who were skilled in the Tao of painting, they were incomparably precious. Even she wouldn't easily teach these things to others. Rashly asking others about these things was truly a bit disrespectful. But she was too curious about this kind of technique. She thought about it all day long, to the point that she couldn't eat or sleep well. If she didn't ask, it would be too painful. Zumo, Miss Zumo, said. This was what she meant by her presumptuous request. For Li Yi, this was really not a troublesome matter. He immediately taught her how to deal with light and shadow, the change of scale, as well as the technique of composition and so on. This was not a secret, nor was it something like alcohol distillation, which he was going to use to eat. There was no confidentiality to speak of. Since Xing Zumo asked, he could not hide it. Xing Zumo didn't expect him to agree so easily, as if he didn't care about these things at all. He didn't even say a word of refusal. However, at this moment, she didn't have the time to be surprised. It was the first time for her to hear what Li Yi had said. She silently memorized it all in her heart. These days, she had been studying painting by herself, and she had gained a lot. In fact, many areas were only separated by a thin layer of window paper. Li Yi only needed to give her a few pointers, and she could immediately see through the clouds and see the fog. For a moment, her beautiful eyes were full of splendor. As Li Yi spoke, he began to be a little surprised in his heart. The ability of this Miss Zuamo to accept things was really a little unexpected. Often, he just said a sentence, and she could think of the real key point. Thinking back to when he was bored, he taught Xiao Huan how to draw. Under his personal teaching, the little maid still did not make any progress for several days. Comparing the two, the gap was really too big. Fong stood behind Li Yi, watching him and the beautiful woman talking happily, and her heart became more and more complicated. The matter of the second miss had not been resolved yet, and the son-in-law was flirting here. If the first miss saw it. Although the first miss was usually gentle, if she was angry, it was really scary. Sigh, things were getting more and more complicated. Fong sighed, and her heart was even more tangled. Thank you, young master, for dispelling my doubts. Zuamo is really grateful. Today's harvest was quite fruitful. Many of the things that Li Yi said were things she had never heard before. It was enough to open up a new school of painting, and all her doubts were solved today. Xing Zuamo's expression was solemn, and she bowed to him with a serious face. The two were only acquaintances, but he was willing to teach her all these techniques. His breadth of mind was unprecedented. She had received his kindness, and even bowed to him as a disciple was not an exaggeration at all. At this time, thinking of the misunderstanding between the two before, and that she had mistakenly regarded him as a lecher, Xing Zuamo was extremely regretful. How could such a broad-minded and noble person be a lecher? Miss is too polite. Li Yi raised his hands with a smile and said, if you have any sisters you are familiar with who also want a 3D portrait, you can have them come to me. 10 liang of silver for one. The price is fair, and I do not cheat anyone. If there are many, you can even get a discount. Just now, Li Yi was thinking that 3D painting had never appeared in this world before. Perhaps it would be very popular. Which woman did not want to keep their youthful, alluring, and infinitely charming appearance so that when they grew old and faded, they could have a souvenir? Pointing at the portrait, he boasted to his descendants, back in the day, grandmother was also known as a beauty in Qing and, huh? Hearing this, Xingzue Mo couldn't help but freeze. A portrait, 10 liang of silver. If you feel the price is not right, we can discuss it when the time comes. Li Yi said with a serious expression, if there are still people who want to learn 3D painting, I can also open a class. You only need to pay 20 liang of silver as an entrance fee, and I guarantee that you will be able to learn and master. Li Yi felt that he had found a new way to make money. He could open a training organization in ancient times and hire a few famous scholars as teachers, such as Learn Poetry from Yang Yanzhou, 30 Days Crash Course on 8-Legged Essays, XX can teach you to write a good policy paper in 2 months. He could open some classes like this. He even thought of the name of the training organization. It would be called New Oriental, Learning to Cook, which school was the best in tutoring for scientific exams. Set your sights on New Oriental of Qing'an. Lu's gaze looked over and with a slight shake, the painting was put away and held in her hand. Son-in-law, Uncle Fong. Xiao Huan followed behind Lu Rui and walked in from the outside with a smile. Fong looked at the thing in Lu Rui's hand and then looked at Li Yi. He silently took a small step towards Li Yi's side. If second miss got angry later, he could still block for son-in-law. Fortunately, they had arrived at this moment. If they had arrived a quarter of an hour earlier, they would have seen son-in-law and that Miss Suemo flirting. Fong alone would not have been able to block the two misses. At this time, Li Yi also had a little fear in his heart. Fortunately, he did not draw a pig's nose or pig's ears for Lu Rui. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Fong waited for a long time and did not see any signs of anger from Second Mississippi. The expression on his face was as indifferent as ever, as if nothing had happened just now. While he was feeling curious and surprised, Li Yi had already walked forward and said to Lu Rui in confusion, "Wife, why are you here?" "I have nothing to do, so I came here to have a look." Lu Rui smiled. At this time, Xiaohuan came from behind her and put the food box in her hand on the table. She said, "Miss asked Xiaohuan to make food and bring it over." Son-in-law, Uncle Fong, sisters, hurry up and eat while it's hot. The kitchen at the back of the shop could cook, but Li Yi had been busy recently and had not had time to open a meal. Meals were usually settled at the small stalls outside. There was not much food in the small food box. Of course, it was not enough for the girls, plus Li Yi and Fong, so Fong was sent to buy some food from outside. He closed the shop and moved a table in the yard. The sun was warm and the breeze was not hurried. Such an atmosphere was suitable for eating. The food that Xiao Huan brought were all ordinary home-cooked dishes. When he opened the food box and smelled the aroma, Li Yi knew that this was not made by Xiao Huan. The little maid's cooking skills were only average. Recently, under his deliberate guidance, she had only improved, but it was not to this extent. He secretly glanced at Lu Rui but did not expose her. If it was not Xiao Huan, he could ignore the otherworldly Mississippi Lu. She was the only one in the family who could make this kind of food. Today, she and Rui came to Rui's workshop together, which surprised Li Yi. Previously, he had mentioned more than once that if she felt bored in the stronghold, she could manage the business of the shop in the prefectural city. However, Lu Rui seemed to have no interest in this, so Li Yi did not mention it again. Today, was this considered, the lady boss inspecting the shop? When he and Lu Rui got along, there was always a strange tacit understanding. The two of them did not talk about what had happened before. The singer on the stage was singing Shuediaogetu in a melodious voice. The young gentleman curled his lips. He could vaguely hear him saying words like "no authorization" and "copyright fee." He waved his hand at the shop assistant not far away. "Sir, what do you need?" The waiter hurriedly ran over and asked with a face full of smiles. "Bring a pot of tea." "All right, please wait a moment, the tea will be served soon." The waiter responded, and not long after, the tea was served. Li Yi took a sip of tea. When he looked up again, the singer on the stage had already retreated, and a few women were dancing on the stage. Their sleeves fluttered in the wind, and it was a beautiful sight. Many cheers came from the seats below the stage. When they saw the excitement, they took out a few copper coins and threw them on the stage. The copper coins hit the dancers, but they didn't dodge or dodge. It was as if they were already used to it. Li Yi watched the dance on the stage with great interest. This kind of dance that was filled with the beauty of classical elegance was very pleasing to the eye. At least, in his opinion, it was more than 1,000 times better than the so-called South Korean dances of the future, where people showed their navels and thighs on the stage. It was just that the behavior of the audience below was a little vulgar and spoiled the scene. However, in this era, the status of actors and actresses was extremely low. Although many people liked to watch them perform, deep down, they looked down on these actors and actresses. This was different from the celebrities of the future generations. Everyone was an actor. One was so miserable, while the other was like the moon surrounded by stars. If these seniors knew how the actors of the future generations were treated, would they feel gratified, or would they lament? The brothels here were equivalent to the theaters of the future. They mainly performed plays, songs, and dances. It was one of the few places of entertainment for the people living at the bottom of society. Li Yi also came here to watch the songs and dances, listen to the plays, and experience the entertainment activities of the people of this world. In the past, he naturally had no interest in these things. The entertainment activities of the 21st century were very developed. When he was bored, he could choose to watch movies or surf the internet. Unfortunately, there were only a few forms of entertainment in this world, so he could only make do with it. After paying 10 coins at the door, he could stay here for a day and watch as many programs as he wanted. Of course, other expenses had to be calculated separately. There were about 100 seats in the brothels. At this time, most of them were not full. Li Yi drank a cup of tea for about half an hour. During this time, there were 2 performances of singing and dancing on the stage. One was an opera. The singing and dancing were not bad. As for the opera, it was really a little boring. After a while, Li Yi lost all interest. In his heart, he thought that if there was a chance in the future, he would also open a theater like this and let those singers sing popular songs. Instead of singing, they would not sing those boring plays. They would perform something like The Legend of the White Snake or The Journey to the West. It would be more interesting. The rich seemed to like this. They would buy a few actors and let them perform for them. When they were free, they could also do some unspoken rules. Just thinking about it made people envious. "Sister Wan, they are coming down soon. What are you going to sing this time?" "Immortals at the Magpie Bridge." Behind the stage, a 15 or 16-year-old girl asked the gentlewoman beside her with a flushed face. "It's time for Sister Wan to go on stage. Then we'll be able to receive a lot of rewards." Another girl said with a smile. "Sister Wan sings well, so they will naturally give you more tips." That girl rolled her eyes at her and looked ahead. She immediately said, "They are already done. Sister Wan, hurry up and go up." The sweet-tempered woman smiled and waited for the people who had just finished singing to come out before she slowly walked in. At the same time, Li Yi, who had lost interest in watching anymore, stood up from his seat, paid for the tea, and walked out. As soon as he walked out of the door, there was a sudden burst of enthusiastic cheers in the brothels. Li Yi stopped in his tracks. When he was about to look back, he saw a lot of people gathered at the entrance of Rui workshop, surrounding it and pointing at it. Li Yi frowned slightly and walked over quickly. Chapter 122. Everyone look, my brother used their Rui do to become like this. A tall and skinny young man in the crowd pointed angrily at Rui workshop and said loudly. Beside him, a young man stood there. His face was swollen and his eyes had become thin slits. One could vaguely make out his human features. My brother heard that the Rui workshop sells Rui do that can refresh the mind. He wanted to use some when he was tired from studying. Who would have thought that after using it, he would become like this? The young man's face was full of grief, and his voice was clearly heard by the surrounding crowd. As soon as he finished speaking, the surrounding crowd all looked at the young man. Pfft, someone couldn't help but laugh out loud. This face, it looks like a pig's head, ha ha ha. Ha, now that you mention it, it really does look like it. Seeing the young man's swollen head that looked like a pig's head, the crowd automatically ignored what the young man had just said. Even though they knew it was a bit rude, they still couldn't help but laugh out loud. Hearing the laughter around him, the young man's swollen face immediately turned the color of a pig's liver. Ha, soy pig's head. At this moment, the people who hadn't laughed earlier finally couldn't help but laugh. The angry young man's expression froze on his face. The development of the situation was completely different from what he had imagined. Shouldn't the crowd be pointing their fingers at Rui workshop and scolding the black-hearted profiteers for selling shoddy goods and scamming customers? How did it turn out like this? Damn it, who brought up the topic of soy pig's head just now? The young man's throat moved, and he secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Then, he gave a few people in the crowd a look. Someone immediately understood what he meant and shouted loudly. Boycott the profiteers. Boycott Rui do. Black-hearted merchants, drag them to the officials. A few abrupt voices came from the crowd, but they were quickly drowned out by the crowd's discussion. I heard that Spring Fragrance Restaurant has a new dish recently. Their soy pig's head is really the best in Qing and Prefecture. Should we go try it another day? Sigh, what's so good about soy pig's head? Braised pig's feet are the best. I think pig's ears are delicious. They're perfect to go with wine. A few people in the crowd looked embarrassed. The young man stood at the entrance of Rui Square and opened his mouth in shock, but he couldn't say a word. The young man's face was flushed red. He looked more like a pig's head that had been soaked in soy sauce. What's going on? Who are you people? What are you doing here? All of a sudden, a powerful voice rang out from the front. Everyone's voices stopped abruptly as they turned to look in the direction of the voice. A tall and sturdy man walked out of the shop. When the young man saw that everyone was no longer discussing the matter of the marinated pig head, he was overjoyed. He quickly wiped away his saliva and a resentful expression immediately appeared on his face. He pointed at the man and said, "It's all because of your Rui do that my brother has become like this. Today, you must give us an explanation." What? Old Fong looked at the young man beside the young man and was also shocked. Whose family is this braised pig head? You. Don't even think about changing the topic. The topic of marinated pig head could not be discussed anymore. The young man pointed at Fong and said loudly, "If you can't give me an explanation today, I'll definitely report you to the authorities. Give us an explanation. We can't let this black-hearted shop go." That's right, we can't let them go. Among the crowd, more and more people began to shout along with them under the uproar of a few voices. Those who were watching a good show could never complain about things getting out of hand. After all, the pig head looked delicious, and it looked miserable. Under the influence of sympathy, the balance in everyone's hearts gradually tilted in their favor. Fong's expression was ugly. If that pig head was really caused by Rui Du, then the matter was serious. It would have a serious impact on Rui Du's voice in the future. Behind him, the pretty faces of a few girls turned pale. They also didn't know how to deal with this matter. Fong, what's the matter? A familiar voice came from the side. Fong turned his head and looked as if he had seen his savior. He was relieved and said hurriedly, "Young master, you came at the right time. He said that there's a problem with our Rui Du." He pointed at the young man and said, "Young master, look." Li Yi looked in the direction where Fong was pointing and was shocked. This pig head. How did it become like this? Isn't it because of your Rui Du? The young man pointed at Li Yi and took out a small porcelain bottle from his pocket. It was the bottle of Rui Du and said angrily. Li Yi looked at the young man and a trace of suspicion flashed in his eyes. Most of the Rui Du was alcohol. For a small number of people who were allergic to alcohol, it was possible for them to have an allergic reaction, but it was impossible for it to become like this. Moreover, when he was selling the Rui Du, he had already made it clear that there shouldn't be such a serious allergic reaction. Could it be that these guys are here to blackmail me? Li Yi looked at the young man thoughtfully. At this moment, there was a sudden commotion outside the crowd. "Make way, make way." A few constables in black separated the crowd and walked in. The middle-aged constable who led them said loudly, "What's the matter?" A trace of joy appeared on the young man's face when he saw the constable, and he hurriedly walked over and said, "Constable, my brother used the Rui nectar sold in this shop, and now he has become like this. The evidence is conclusive, and these people still want to deny it. Please uphold justice for us, constable." "Hey, how did it become like this?" The young man's appearance also startled the constable. At this moment, the young man secretly gave him a look. The middle-aged constable's expression didn't change. He waved his hand and said, "If you have any grievances, you can talk about it when we return to the county government. Disperse, disperse." Hearing this, Li Yi's eyes slightly narrowed. Generally speaking, for such a small matter, constables would only suggest the two parties to mediate in private. They wouldn't easily bring it up in court. This young man didn't even mention whether he was willing to mediate or not, but the middle-aged constable couldn't wait to bring them back to the county government. Of course, Li Yi wouldn't believe that there wasn't something fishy going on. Moreover, when he saw the two of them secretly exchanging glances, he coincidentally saw it. Hearing that they were going to the county government, Fong's expression changed slightly. The faces of the girls behind him were even paler. At this moment, Li Yi took a step forward and pointed at the young man. He said, "Constable, before we go to the county government, can I ask him a few questions?" "What questions?" "You'll have the chance to ask him when we get to the county government." The middle-aged constable impatiently waved his hand and said to the young constables, "What are you waiting for? Take them all away." A secret smile appeared on the young man's face. Once they arrived at the county government, he would be the one to decide who was right and who was wrong. The burly man and scholar before him were no different from fish on the chopping board. So what if we let him ask? It won't take much time. At this moment, a faint voice came from outside the crowd. Chapter 123. Although the woman's voice was clear and melodious, it was clearly not what the young man liked to hear. "Who said that?" "The constable is speaking. Is it someone you can interrupt?" The young man turned his head with a dissatisfied expression and looked towards the direction of the voice. The light blue constable uniform that the woman wore was slightly different from the other constables. At this moment, she was standing outside the crowd with her arms crossed in front of her chest and a saber hanging from her waist. Her gaze was indifferent as she looked over. The scene that the young man saw when he turned his head had clearly stunned him. However, at this moment, the middle-aged constable's foot was already flying towards him. Shut up. The middle-aged constable's foot caused the young man to stagger. When he raised his head, his face was already filled with a flattering smile. He walked in front of the young woman and asked, "Boss, why are you here?" The young man was momentarily stunned by the inexplicable kick. He didn't understand why the middle-aged constable was acting so crazily. Bringing the shopkeeper of the Rui workshop back to the county office had been personally ordered by the county lieutenant. He was only a lowly constable. Why didn't he listen to the county lieutenant's orders? Of course, he didn't know that the middle-aged constable knew better than anyone else that this young lady was someone who even dared to point at the county magistrate and scold him. Furthermore, even after being scolded, the county magistrate didn't even dare to fart. Compared to the county lieutenant, it was obvious that this young lady who hated evil and couldn't tolerate even the slightest bit of sand in her eyes was much more difficult to deal with. The woman didn't pay attention to the middle-aged constable and glanced at Li Yi as she said indifferently, "What do you want to ask?" "Ask away." "Thank you, constable." Li Yi cupped his hands towards her and thought that the young lady of the Li family was still reasonable. He turned his head to look at the young man whose head was swollen like a pig's and asked, "You said that your pig's head right now is because you used our shop's Rui do?" Pig's head. The young man didn't expect that this scholar would stab him in the heart as soon as he opened his mouth. He almost spat out a mouthful of blood as he gritted his teeth and said, "Yes." "Do you remember when you bought it?" Li Yi asked again. 3 days ago, the young man answered without hesitation. In his heart, he rejoiced that he had done his homework before coming here. Otherwise, he wouldn't be stumped by this scholar's questions. "Do we buy it directly or through an order?" "Buy it directly." "What was the price of Rui do at that time?" 1 tael of silver per bottle." "Who did you buy it from that day?" "You gave it to me personally." "Do you still remember the time?" "Around c. How much silver did the instigator give you today?" 10 taels. The speed at which Li Yi asked questions became faster and faster. The young man was already prepared and answered smoothly. He was able to answer subconsciously. He mocked Li Yi in his heart. As early as yesterday, he had begun to prepare for this and had practiced it countless times. There would not be any mistakes. Even if this scholar were to ask another 10 or 8 questions, he would not make any mistakes. Seeing that the scholar had suddenly stopped talking, the young man's lips curled into a smile. He finally gave up. When he turned around, he realized that the crowd around him had quietened down without him noticing. Many of the onlookers began to look at him with a strange expression. The middle-aged constable looked up at the sky as if there was something in the sky that attracted him. The young man who instructed him to do these things twitched his mouth and his face was ashen. He thought that he had considered all aspects, but he never thought that he would find such a pig-headed teammate. Seeing the strange expressions of the crowd, the young man was astonished. What was wrong with everyone? "Constable, I have finished my questions." Li Yi once again cupped his hands at the woman and then stood quietly at the side. Mingzu turned to look at him. The indifference in her eyes faded and finally, a strange expression appeared. In her mind, she recalled the process of him solving the silver snatching case and how he managed to get the truth out of the man's mouth with just a few words. This scholar really did have some ability after all. At this moment, the crowd could not hold it in any longer and roared with laughter. "This person is too stupid. He confessed so easily. So he was ordered by someone to frame someone else. This young master is really smart. With just a few words, he was able to get the truth out of him." Now that the truth was out, the matter was out of the hands of the young man and the middle-aged constable. With a glance from the young woman, the rest of the constables rushed forward and arrested the young man whose head was swollen like a pig's. In the crowd, the expressions of a few figures changed and they quietly retreated. Even though the middle-aged constable had received the order from the magistrate, he did not dare to do anything at this time. Not to mention that there were so many people watching, even if his superior was present, he could only act impartially. When he turned to look at Li Yi, Fang, and the others, he immediately put on a smile and said, "I'm really sorry. I almost fell for these two vile people's tricks and caused you to be wronged." Knowing that the constable did not mean what he said, Li Yi did not expose him. He cupped his fists and said a few polite words as he watched the constables escort the two people away. "Are you interested in becoming a constable?" The young woman crossed her arms and looked at Li Yi with interest. Although there was no shortage of constables in the yamen, most of them were good-for-nothings. There was a shortage of smart people like her. If he could have such a smart subordinate, it would save him a lot of trouble when investigating cases. Be a constable. Li Yi was stunned for a moment and then shook his head. Although being a constable sounded prestigious, the status of a constable was not high. It could only be considered a temporary job, and the nature of the job was very dangerous. He was not like the young woman in front of him. As a descendant of the royal family, she actually had the interest to be a constable in a small yamen. He did not know if the people above him were out of their minds. Of course, Li Yi was not curious as to whether this princess or princess had the idea of going deep into the grassroots to experience the people's feelings. In any case, he had no interest in being a constable at all. "Are you the shopkeeper of this Rui workshop?" Seeing that Li Yi refused, the young woman did not show any disappointment on her face. She turned to look at the signboard of Rui workshop, threw over a piece of silver, and said, "I've long heard of your Rui dew. I happened to pass by today. Give me a bottle." "I'm sorry, today's Rui dew is sold out." Li Yi regretted giving all the stock to Li Xian just now. He threw the silver back and said, "You don't need the silver. Come and get it tomorrow when the constable patrols the street." Although Li Yi was not a generous person, he was clear about gratitude and grudges. If she did not give him the chance just now, today's matter might be a little troublesome. It was just a bottle of Rui dew. He was really embarrassed to accept the silver from her. "Well, I'll come again tomorrow." The young woman did not stand on ceremony. After taking back the silver, she waved her hand and said lightly. Then she turned around and disappeared on the street. Li Yi looked at the direction in which she left, and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. In the morning, there was someone who wanted to buy the formula of Rui dew by force. Now, there were these two people who were stirring up trouble. It was obvious that they were in cahoots with the middle-aged constable. It seemed that more and more people had their eyes on Rui dew. The shock in his heart was indescribable. It was not unusual for the men in the stockade to know how to cook, but if this person was the son-in-law, then it was very unusual. Moreover, just smelling the fragrance made him salivate. If his wife had such cooking skills, Fang was afraid that he would wake up every night laughing in his dreams. After a while, Li Yi served the egg fried rice on 2 plates. Among the white rice grains, the golden eggs were vaguely visible, and the fragrance assailed his nostrils. In this era where cooking was the mainstream, it was the first time that Fang had seen such a legendary dish as egg fried rice. "Son-in-law. Is this edible?" Fang raised his head and looked at Li Yi with some suspicion. Li Yi glanced at him and ignored Fang. He minded his own business and tasted it with a spoon. Although his cooking was not as good as his mother's, it was still not bad. With Li Yi testing the poison first and not showing any strange expression on his face, Fang immediately felt relieved. He found a small jar of wine from the counter and returned to the dining table. Li Yi raised his head and glanced at him. This guy actually dared to eat egg fried rice with wine. He did not know if there were others who did this later, but it was definitely unprecedented. Learning from Li Yi, Fang tasted it with a spoon. A satisfied expression immediately appeared on his face. Delicious, it was really F***ing delicious. When he went back, he must let his wife learn from him. A woman's cooking was actually not as delicious as the son-in-law's cooking. Even if she did not find it embarrassing, he would feel ashamed for her. With this in mind, when he reached for the jar of wine, a figure walked in from outside. Chapter 125. A woman in a light blue constable uniform walked into the shop. Fong's hand, which was reaching for the wine jar, paused. He was stunned for a moment and then turned to look at Li Yi. Li Yi was actually waiting for the female constable to take the Rui Du, then he could close the shop and go back to the stockade village. He was thinking that if she didn't come back by the time he finished his meal, he would send someone to send her to the county government office. Now he could save himself the trouble. Putting down the spoon in his hand, he stood up and took out the Rui Du that had been prepared for her. When he handed it to her, he subconsciously said politely, "Have you eaten yet, constable? How about having a meal here before you leave?" Whether in the original world or now, this sentence was a very common greeting. Food was the most important thing for people. Whether they could fill their stomachs was related to their survival. It was also the most important issue for people in the ancient times and now. Therefore, when they met, people often asked, "Have you eaten?" or "Do you want to have a meal at home?" to show their concern for the other party. Over time, it became a conventional greeting and gradually became the most common greeting when people met each other. The standard answer to this greeting was, "Thank you, I have eaten." The two exchanged a few more polite words and then parted. One was enthusiastic and the other was polite. Both the host and the guest were happy. Li Yi was waiting for the female constable to decline and leave so that he could finish his meal and go home quickly. Seeing that she didn't respond for a long time, he raised his head and saw that she was looking at the egg fried rice on the table. The next moment, she turned to look at him and said lightly, "All right." The smile on Li Yi's face froze. He felt like he had shot himself in the foot. The female constable's unconventional behavior made him unable to react for a moment. He was stunned for a while and then said, "Then, have a seat first. I'll go get you some rice." After all, she had done him a favor twice. Li Yi wouldn't be so stingy that he couldn't even afford to treat her to a bowl of egg-fried rice. After a short moment of surprise, he turned around and walked towards the direction of the kitchen. The female constable walked to the table and put her knife aside. She sat down casually and looked at the egg-fried rice on the plate. A rare look of doubt appeared in her eyes. Ever since she was young, she had tasted delicacies from delicacies to street food, but this was the first time she had seen this kind of food. Just by smelling this unique fragrance, her appetite was aroused. Ever since the female constable sat across from him, old Fong started to feel a little uneasy. One of the reasons was due to her identity, but the other reason was the pressure he felt from her. This female officer was an expert. Old Fong knew very well that he wouldn't be able to defeat someone who could make him feel this way if they were to really fight. Wine. The female constable's beautiful eyes lit up when she saw the wine jar on the table. She reached out and took the wine jar. After opening it, the fragrance of the wine flowed out. A trace of surprise appeared on her face. She picked up the wine jar and took a big gulp. A blush appeared on her pretty face. She wiped the corner of her mouth and couldn't help but exclaim, "Good wine." When Li Yi walked into the shop with a plate of egg-fried rice, he saw such a scene. It seemed that regardless of gender or alcohol tolerance, the old Li family loved good wine. This female constable was usually like Lu Rui, always with a cold and unapproachable face. After seeing good wine, she immediately changed her attitude. "Where did you buy this wine?" The female constable put down the wine jar and looked up at Li Yi. "I brewed it myself." Li Yi placed the egg-fried rice on the table in front of her, sat back in his seat and started to eat. The wine she drank just now had been distilled a few times. It should be around 40% alcohol. Fong had a headache for 2 days and hadn't touched wine for a long time. He had only recovered recently. However, it seemed that he wouldn't be able to drink this wine today. Without waiting for the female constable to speak again, he continued, "If you want to buy it, you can wait for a few days. This wine will be sold in the Rui workshop." Hearing this, the female constable didn't ask any more questions. After taking another sip of wine, she put the wine jar beside her and tasted the egg-fried rice. Her beautiful eyes lit up again. She raised her head and looked at Li Yi in surprise. Whether it was the Rui dew, the strong wine, the weird painting on the wall, or the food that she had never seen before, this scholar had a lot of weird things around him. Fong didn't enjoy his meal to his heart's content. He met the female constable who ate for free. The wine that he got from his son-in-law with great difficulty was taken by her, and she had no intention of returning it. The food that was supposed to be for 2 people was divided by her. Fong wasn't full either and felt depressed. He didn't even have the taste of the food. After eating and drinking, the female constable went to patrol the streets as usual. Her alcohol tolerance was not bad, even Fong couldn't compare to her. She drank all the wine in the small jar and her expression didn't change. She was supposed to patrol the streets. There might not be a rule in the Jing kingdom that forbade constables from patrolling the streets after drinking. However, this wasn't something that Li Yi could worry about. After buying some things on the streets, she closed the shop with Fong and rented a horse carriage from a carriage shop not far from the shop. Then, she slowly drove out of the mansion. After returning to the stockade village and passing by the school, Li Yi stood outside the door and listened for a while. Qin Qing was teaching the naughty brats to memorize rules for a disciple. Education had to start from when they were young. Although he didn't know what kind of path they would take in the future, it was worth it to do something for these children after being stared at by so many pairs of admiring eyes for so long and hearing them call him Mr. from the bottom of their hearts. Rules for a Disciple was the introductory reading material that Li Yi had chosen for the naughty brats. The rhythm was catchy, and the words were easy to read. It was close to the vernacular. While they were learning how to write, they could also learn the principles of how to conduct oneself, as well as all kinds of common sense and etiquette. The naughty brats were still young, so it was important to cultivate good values. In order to prevent them from becoming like their parents when they grew up, they had to be taught these correct values from a young age. In order to make it more interesting, Li Yi made all the original allusions in the Rules for a Disciple into short stories. Every day, he would let Qin Qing teach a few sentences to the naughty brats. Then, he would intersperse them with a few stories, such as getting rid of evil, fighting tigers, and fighting dragons. The naughty brats loved to listen to these kinds of stories, so they would remember them more firmly. Of course, even in this era of feudal orthodoxy, Li Yi still didn't want the naughty brats to grow up to become stupid, loyal, and filial people. What he taught them had been greatly edited and modified to conform to the mainstream Confucian ideology of this era, but it wouldn't severely suppress the naughty brats' nature. After listening for a while outside the school, the naughty brats were all very obedient. When Qin Qing read a sentence, they would read a sentence. The school was orderly, no different from when he was here. Afterwards, he went to the workshop to take a look. The daily demand for Ruidu was not small, but there was a limited amount of manpower in the stockade. Everyone was working against time. Fortunately, this situation wouldn't last for long. In the next 2 days, Li Xian would send someone over to observe and learn the distillation method. After a few days, Ning Wang Fu's shop would open for business, and the pressure here would be reduced to the minimum. Chapter 126. In the morning, he sent someone to deliver Rui Lu to the shop, and Li Yi could enjoy his vacation. The weather was good today. It was early autumn, and the leaves had not fallen yet. There was not much of a bleak feeling on the mountain. The shouts of the naughty children filled the gentle grassy slope. As a teacher, Qin Qing was much more responsible than Li Yi. She taught seriously every day. It was rare for the naughty children to have a day of extracurricular activities. They ran happily on a small grassy slope by the stream, revealing their lively nature. Qin Qing stood not far away and smiled as she watched the naughty children. After spending time with them, her impression of the naughty and mischievous children had greatly changed. They now truly looked like a female teacher. Not far away from her, Lu Xiaohu was playing a role-playing game with a group of boys. He liked to play the role of Sun Wukong the most. He brandished a wooden stick with great vigor. The other naughty children watched from the side, their eyes filled with envy. According to the story of Journey to the West, the chubby naughty child who played the role of Buddha was supposed to subdue him and press him under the five-finger mountain. However, when he saw how powerful the stick was, he immediately hid far away and did not dare to get close. Xiaohu, be careful. Don't hit the others. Qin Qing warned him from afar. Lu Xiaohu responded, threw down the stick, and ran away with the naughty children. About 100 feet up the grassy slope, Li Yi had already used a bamboo stick to skewer the meat, brushed it with sauce, and placed it on an iron rack. Below the rack was a burning charcoal fire. The fragrance of roasted meat spread everywhere. Not far away, Fang, who was roasting fish caught from the stream on the fire with a few men, silently swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He decisively handed the fat fish he had just skewered to someone else, ran to Li Yi's side, and sat down. He gave Li Yi a silly smile, and stared at the roasting rack, unwilling to move his eyes away. Further away, the women of the village gathered together and laughed. After a while, Xiaohuan ran over and ran to Li Yi's side. In a soft voice, she said, "Young master, the second miss asked if the meat is ready, let her wait a little longer." Li Yi poked at the charcoal fire with a wooden stick. Haste makes waste. Roasting meat required patience. Mississippi Lu, on the other hand, was free. All she needed to do was to open her mouth. Li Yi himself, on the other hand, had become a free roaster. "Oh," the young maidservant replied. Just as she was about to run over, Lu Xiaohu and a group of naughty children ran over excitedly. "Sir, sir." Lu Xiaohu handed over a small white thing in his hand and said, "Sir, sir, we just caught a rabbit. Sir, please roast it." When Fang saw the rabbit, his eyes lit up. Rabbit meat was tender and delicious. In the past, when he was a teenager like this, he had secretly roasted it many times. However, there was one time when he accidentally burned his clothes. When he returned home, his parents pressed him down on the Kong bed and gave him a good spanking. Since then, he hadn't eaten it again. Li Yi took the rabbit that was not much bigger than his palm. This rabbit didn't seem to have much meat. Roasting it wouldn't even be enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. Furthermore, it was such a white and soft little thing. He really couldn't bear to do it. At this time, he felt someone tugging on his sleeve. He turned his head and saw that the young maidservant's eyes were full of pleading. "Young master, don't eat this little rabbit, okay?" Li Yi had never been immune to the young maidservant's coquettish attacks. He stuffed the rabbit into her arms and said, all right. I won't eat it. You can take it and play with it." The young maidservant carried the rabbit away happily. Fang's face revealed a regretful expression. Rabbit meat was really delicious. "Excuse me, where does Li Yi live?" In the Willow Leaf village, a young and handsome man stopped a villager and asked, "Who are you people?" The man looked at these strangers and asked with a vigilant face. The village was isolated from the outside world. On normal days, outsiders would rarely come here. This young man was dressed luxuriously and had an extraordinary temperament. The men behind him had weapons on their waists. At first glance, one could tell that they were not ordinary people. Why did these people appear in the village? don't be nervous. I am Li Yi's friend. I have something to discuss with him," the young man said with a smile. The man looked suspiciously at the handsome young man in front of him. Seeing that he didn't seem to have any evil intentions, he pointed to the front and said, "The young master is not at home right now. Walk along this road. After about a quarter of an hour, you will see a small stream. You can find him there." "Thank you." The young man cupped his hands and led the few people to walk in the direction pointed by the man. The man looked at the backs of the few people walking away. He scratched his head and turned to do his own things. Regardless of the purpose of these strangers, they couldn't delay the young master's business. If they didn't have evil intentions, it would be fine. But if they had bad intentions, they would be seeking death in their own territory. "Young master, slow down, slow down." A middle-aged fat man followed behind the young man with his forehead full of sweat. After walking such a long mountain road, it was a little hard for him to bear with his physical strength. The fat man's surname was Wang. He was a housekeeper of Ning Wang Fu. He single-handedly managed the outside business of the Wang Fu. This time, he came with the young master to discuss the cooperation of Rui Lu. This housekeeper Wang had long heard of the Rui Lu that had become popular in Qing and recently. This was an elegant business and was suitable for Ning Wang Fu. He had been thinking about when to ask his superiors if he should intervene in this business. However, he hadn't thought that this young master, who idled around all day and did nothing but work, would also take care of these matters. He immediately had him build a workshop and arrange for people. After a series of orders, the housekeeper was slightly dumbfounded. This was a good thing for the Wang Fu. After all, no matter if it was a commoner or a noble, no one would say no to money. Especially when he saw the strong wine that the young master took out, housekeeper Wang's eyes began to shine. This wasn't strong wine, this was clearly shining silver. However, the workshop was built in the Wang Fu, the people were provided by the Wang Fu, and the goods were sold by the Wang Fu. In the end, the profits had to be split 50-50. In this world, no one dared to do business with Ning Wang Fu like this. The young master didn't understand these things and casually agreed. He turned his head and ordered the servants of the Wang Fu to do it. However, as the housekeeper of the Wang Fu, he had to maximize the profits of the Wang Fu. He couldn't agree to such an absurd method of distribution. The reason why housekeeper Wang insisted on coming this time was because of this matter. He really wanted to see who had the guts to even dare to take advantage of Ning Wang Fu. By the stream, Fong didn't know how much saliva he swallowed. Just as he was about to take the first skewer of meat that Li Yi handed over to him, a slender white hand suddenly appeared and snatched the meat skewer before he could. Under Fong's stunned gaze, the handsome young master bit into the meat skewer. There was a surprised expression on his face as he praised, "Delicious." You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.